Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the answer to a question some of you had. We spent a lot of time recently talking about Haydn's amazing The Seven Last Words of the Savior on the Cross. In other words, this thing here. It's really quite amazing. Here it's translated as The Seven Last Words of Christ on the Cross. And in French, it's Les Sept Dernières Paroles du Christ en Croix. Yeah, an amazing piece of music. One of the real sort of iconic pieces of spiritual instrumental music composed in the 18th century. Now, it became so popular, as we've discussed before, that Haydn himself prepared a version for string quartet. Someone else did one as a piano sonata, which Haydn approved. And then at one point, Haydn was zipping around through Europe on his travels, maybe on his way back from England. I forget exactly when it was, but it doesn't really matter. And he heard an oratorio version of the piece, which is kind of fascinating. And he heard it and he thought to himself, I could do better than that. So he got the participation of Baron Gottfried von Swieten, who was the imperial librarian and, an early music enthusiast. It was Swieten who got Mozart to do all of his Handel transcriptions, for example, and who commissioned C.P.E. Bach's Hamburg symphonies, telling C.P.E., just do what you want, whatever you want. Really an amazing and remarkable guy. He supposedly had the personality of a doorknob. At least that's what we hear. But in any case, he sat down with Haydn and they diddled the text somewhat to make it what they felt, in a way, they felt more appropriate. And then Haydn took the existing orchestral work and he added trombones and a contrabassoon and clarinets, enriched the orchestration because it had really been written about, a decade or so and a bit before. And so Haydn updated the orchestration to be a little richer than what they would have found in the church of Santa Cueva in Cadiz, Spain, for which it was written. And voila, instant oratorio. The other thing that makes the oratorio version so amazing is that Haydn added a wind band solo introduction to what became part 2 of the oratorio. So it became a work in 2 parts, as opposed to just a single continuous through composed thing. And that works really, really, really well because of the vocal version. Part 1 ends with the darkest of all of the movements, the point at which Jesus says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Complete desolation, which, by the way, is in Haydn's desolation and abandonment key. He had one. It was F minor. And when Haydn is in F minor, he is almost always setting a text that speaks of abandonment, loneliness, isolation, and those kinds of emotions. It's really kind of fascinating. No one, I think, has actually discussed this in depth, but Haydn did have a personal minor key, and it meant something very, very specific. And you can follow it through both his instrumental and texted music. F in general, also F sharp. The Farewell Symphony, for example, in F sharp minor. Fascinating fact about Haydn and the key of F in the minor, F sharp things in the minor. Anyway, so that's the end of part 1. Then there is this extraordinarily gaunt, profound wind band meditation. No strings, just that enlarged wind ensemble with the clarinets, contrabassoon, trombones, and whatnot. It's really an extraordinary movement. And that begins the process by which we gradually reemerge into the light with the last 3 of the 7 last words. And then finally, the earthquake, with a chorus going, oh, woe, the earthquake is here. What a pity. It's terrible. It's frightening. Frankly, the earthquake works better just for orchestra, in my opinion, anyway. Although it is nice to have people shrieking and screaming and carrying on. I mean, that's always fun. So, and Haydn doesn't, hold back at all. It still ends with the world's first triple forte. So it's a thrilling work. Anyway, it has been totally ignored historically in favor of the string quartet version, of the piece, and it's only recently that the orchestral version has come back, to come into its own, which was, of course, the original version. And as far as the oratorio version goes, well, there was a version with János Ferencik and Hungariton. I remember when I was starting to collect Haydn and I wanted the choral version, that was the one. You couldn't find any others. And since then, there have been a couple more, but the one to get still, and that was the whole point of this video, because you'd asked, is this one. Nikolaus Harnoncourt with the Concentus Musicus Wien, the Arnold Schoenberg Choir, and some terrific soloists, Inge Nielsen, Margareta Hintermeier, Anthony Rolfe-Johnson, and Robert Holl, doing all of their usual things. It's really, really a beautiful performance. It has none of Harnoncourt's occasional eccentricities. It's just intense and powerful, and he really savors the variety of color that Haydn builds into the piece, because each of these movements is scored somewhat differently, so that you have as much of a kaleidoscopic effect and a variety of texture, of color, of rhythm, of harmony. I mean, it's amazing that these are basically a bunch of adagios, and they don't bore you. They're really quite thrilling. And what's even more amazing, frankly, is that in adding, the extra introduction for part 2, he threw in another adagio. I remember there were 7 adagios plus an introduction, which is an adagio. And by adagio, I mean adagio, lento, largo, grave. I mean, it's all of those. They're not all the same speed. They're all slow movements, with different varieties of slow movement. And he added yet another slow movement, but it's also one of the most interesting things in the work. I mean, it really is. And one of the most interesting things Haydn or anyone else wrote in that period. It's amazing. I keep saying that, but it really truly is. And, the Arnold Schoenberg Choir is terrific. And I just want to see if they have here, yes, the musicians. So you just see how many people are actually participating, because it sounds like a really substantial number, and it's not ridiculous, but it's enough to give the piece the scope and grandeur that it needs. I mean, you know that you're going to have double flutes and oboes and bassoons and a contrabassoon, and then 2 horns, 2 trombones, 2 trumpets, and timpani. All right, the key is the strings. So I'm going to count them up here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, 15 violins, so it's 8 and 7, 8 first, 7 seconds probably. 1, 2, 3, 4 violas, 2 cellos, 2 basses. Really enough. You could always have more, right? You could make it as big as you want it to be by just multiplying the strings out, and if necessary, doubling everything else. But it's a substantial ensemble for a period instrument performance, and one that really sounds gorgeous in this Teldec recording, which is, who knows what label it's on now. It's Warner somehow, but it's splendid. And it's one of the best things Harnoncourt did in Haydn. It really is. And one of the most important Haydn recordings that anybody did. If you want to get the full impact of the work as Haydn intended, you've got to hear the orchestral original, and you should hear this too. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.